Well, good morning. It is Saturday, December 26th. We're here for our morning devotion, and I trust everybody had a great Christmas, time of celebration and joy, and just to gather amongst people and to be together. Today's devotion comes from Psalm 78. It's entitled God's Goodness and Israel's Ingratitude. And I will warn you, it is very long. It's the longest one we've come across. It's 72 verses. So just giving you a heads up. And so it begins. Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings from of old, things that we have heard and known, that our ancestors have told us. We will not hide them from our children. We will tell them. We will tell to the coming generations the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that God has done. God has established a decree in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel when he commanded our ancestors to teach their children, the next generation might know them, the children yet unborn, and rise up and tell them to their children, so that they should set their hopes in God and not forget the works of the Lord, but keep his commandments. And that they should not be like their ancestors, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation whose hearts was not steadfast, whose spirit was not faithful to God. The Ephraimites, armed with a bow, turned back on the day of battle. They did not keep God's covenant, but refused to walk according to his law. They forgot what he had done and the miracle that he had shown them. In sight of their ancestors, he worked marvels in the land of Egypt, in the fields of Zoan. He divided the seas and let them pass through. He made the water stand like a heap. In the daytime, he led them with a cloud, and at night with a fiery light. He split rocks open in the wilderness. He gave them drink abundantly from the deep. He made streams come out of the rock and caused water to flow down like rivers. Yet they still sinned more against him, rebelled against the Most High in the desert. They tested God in their hearts. They demanded the food they craved. They spoke against God, saying, "Can God spread a table in the wilderness? Even though he struck the rock so that the water gushed out, the torrents overflowed, can he also give bread or provide meat for his people?" Therefore, when the Lord heard, he was full of rage. A fire was kindled against Jacob. His anger mounted against Israel because they had no faith in God, and they did not trust his saving power. Yet he commanded the skies above and opened the doors of the heavens. He rained down for them manna to eat and gave them the grain of heaven. Mortals ate the bread of angels. He sent them food in abundance. He caused the east winds to blow in the heavens, and by the power he led out the south wind. He rained flesh upon them like dust, winged birds like the sands of the tree. Let them fall within their camp and all around their dwellings. And they ate and were filled, for he gave them what they craved. But before they had satisfied this craving, while this food was still in their mouths, the anger of God rose against them, and he killed the strongest of them and laid low the flower of Israel. In spirit, or in spite of all this that they had sinned, they did not believe in his wonders. So he made their days vanish like a breath, and their years in terror. When he killed them, they sought for him. They repented and sought God earnestly. They remembered that God was their rock, their most high God, their Redeemer. But they faltered him with their mouths. They lied to him with their tongues. Their heart was not steadfast toward him. They were not true to his covenant. Yet he, being compassionate, forgave their iniquity and did not destroy them. Often he restrained his anger and did not stir up all his wrath. He remembered that they were but flesh, a wind that passed and does not come again. How often they rebelled against him in the wilderness and grieved him in the desert. They tested God again and again and provoked the Holy One of Israel. They did not keep his mind in power, or the day when he redeemed them from their foe, when he displayed his signs in Egypt and his miracle in the feet of Zoan. He turned their rivers to blood, so that they could not drink from their streams. He sent them swarms of flies, which devoured them, and frogs, which destroyed them. He gave their crops to the caterpillar, and the fruits of their labor to the locusts. He destroyed their vines with hail, and their sycamores with frost. He gave over their cattle to the hail, and their flocks to the thunderbolt. He let loose on them his fierce anger, wrath, indignation, and distress, a company of destroying angels. He made a path for his anger. He did not spare them from their death, but gave their lives over to the plagues. He struck all the firstborn of Egypt, the first issue of their strength in the tents of Ham. Then he led out his people like sheep and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. He led them safely so that they were not afraid, so that the sea overwhelmed their enemies. And he brought them to this holy hill, to the mountain that his right hand had won. He drove out the nations before them. He apportioned them for possession, settled the tribes of Israel in their tents. Yet they tested the Most High God and rebelled against him. They did not observe his decrees, but turned away in their faithfulness like their ancestors. They twisted like a treacherous bow, for they provoked him to anger with the high places, and they moved him to jealousy with the idols. When God heard, he was full of wrath, and he utterly rejected Israel. He abandoned his dwelling at Seol, the tent where he dwelt among mortals, and delivered his power to captivity, his glory to the hand of the foe. He gave his people to the sword and vented his wrath on a heritage. Fire devoured their young men, and their girls had no marriage song. Their priests fell by the sword, and their widows made no lamentation. Then the Lord awoke from his sleep. Like the warrior shouting because of wine, he had his adversaries to rout. He put them to everlasting disgrace. He rejected the tent of Joseph. He did not choose the tribe of Ephraim, but he chose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which he loves. He built a sanctuary like the high heavens, like the earth, which he founded forever. He chose his servant David and took him from the sheepfold. From tending the nursing ewe, he brings him to the shepherds of the people, Jacob, of Israel, his inheritance. With upright hearts he tended them and guided them with a skillful hand. Whew. That's a long one. What's the point of all this? The point is, in the psalmist who is writing this, goes and just retells the stories of God. You know, the plagues in Egypt, parting of the Red Seas, mammon in the wilderness, water from rocks, tells all these great stories of the things that God has done. And what do the people do to thank God? They become indignant and forget of all these great things that God has done. And they curse God, and they test God. And what does God do? He offers love, and he offers grace. And he performs new miracles, and he calls up people like David and Jacob and Isaac and Abraham. He calls all these people to be God's prophets in the world, and yet the people don't listen. The people turn away. We need to retell the stories of God. At the very beginning, he talks about telling it to our children and their children's children, to tell the stories of God, lest they be forgotten. For these stories of God are great stories of miracles on these earth. And the more we tell them, the more they continue to live on. So go forth this day in the peace and the love of Christ. Amen.